Officer Ray Donovan couldn't have picked a worse day to flex his authority. The 8-year veteran of the Westlake Police Department had started his shift like any other Tuesday. A quick briefing, some paperwork, and then patrol duty along the town's main roads. A light rain was falling, making the asphalt shine under the streetlights as evening approached. Donovan was parked in his usual spot near the intersection of Maple and 5th, partially hidden behind the old gas station. His coffee was getting cold, and he'd been sitting there for nearly an hour with nothing to show for it. The sergeant had been on his case lately about meeting quotas, and Donovan was already behind this month. That's when he spotted the silver Audi making a right turn. The driver hadn't come to a complete stop at the sign. At least that's what Donovan would later claim in his report. He flipped on his lights and pulled out into traffic, following the car for a few blocks before the driver finally pulled over to the curb. Dr. Elaine Wilson was already running late. The pediatric surgeon had received an urgent call about a complex case just as she was leaving the hospital. She'd promised to look over the scans before morning and was hurrying home to her family after a 14-hour shift. When the police lights flashed in her rearview mirror, she felt a knot form in her stomach. She hadn't been speeding, she was certain of that. She pulled over carefully, turned off the engine, and placed her hands on the steering wheel, exactly as her father had taught her years ago. The officer took his time approaching her window, his flashlight beam sweeping through her car before landing squarely on her face. "License and registration," Donovan said, not bothering with a greeting. His voice had that flat, authoritative tone that seemed universal among police officers. "Good evening, officer," Dr. Wilson replied, keeping her voice calm and respectful. "May I ask why I've been pulled over?" Donovan's expression hardened slightly. "You rolled through that stop sign back there. License and registration, please." Dr. Wilson was certain she'd stopped completely, but she knew better than to argue. "Of course," she said, reaching slowly for her purse. "I'm going to get my wallet now." As she handed over her documents, she added, "I'm actually a surgeon at Memorial Hospital. I'm coming off a long shift and heading home to review some patient files. I apologize if I made an error at the stop sign." Donovan barely glanced at her, hospital ID visible in her wallet. Something in his demeanor shifted subtly, a tightening around his eyes. Maybe it was her professional status, maybe it was her calm demeanor, or maybe it was just that he'd been having a bad day. Whatever the reason, Donovan seemed to take her response as a challenge. "Step out of the vehicle, please," he said, handing her license back. "Excuse me?" Dr. Wilson asked, genuinely confused. "Is there a problem with my license?" "I said step out of the vehicle," Donovan repeated, his hand moving to rest on his belt. "I smell something suspicious." This was a lie. There was nothing suspicious in Dr. Wilson's car, and they both knew it. But in that moment, a decade of surgical training kicked in. She recognized when a situation was deteriorating and needed to be managed carefully. With deliberate movements, she reached for her phone on the passenger seat. "I'm going to step out as requested," she said clearly, "but I'd like to record this interaction for both our safety. Is that all right with you, Officer Donovan?" She had caught his name from the badge on his chest. "Put the phone down," Donovan snapped. "That won't be necessary. I believe it is my right to record this interaction," Dr. Wilson said, her voice still calm but firm. "I'm not interfering with your duties. I'm simply creating a record." She pressed record and placed the phone on her dashboard, then slowly opened her door and stepped out into the light rain. She was still wearing her hospital scrubs under her coat, her surgical cap stuffed in her pocket out of habit. "Officer, I've had a very long day saving lives," she said quietly. "I'm not trying to be difficult, but I don't understand why I need to exit my vehicle for a rolling stop." Donovan's face flushed. "Are you telling me how to do my job, ma'am? Because that's not how this works." He took a step closer, using his height to intimidate her. "I said I smell something suspicious, and that gives me probable cause to search your vehicle." Dr. Wilson stood her ground. "With all due respect, officer, that's not accurate. You need a warrant to search my car unless I give consent, which I don't. There's nothing illegal in my car, but that's beside the point. This is about my rights." The rain was coming down harder now, soaking through her thin coat. In the glow of the streetlights, other cars slowed as they passed, drivers rubbernecking at the scene. "Let me explain something to you," Donovan said, lowering his voice. "Out here I decide what happens, not some doctor who thinks she's above the law." He gestured toward her car. "Now step aside while I make sure you're not hiding anything." Dr. Wilson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. "Officer Donovan, I'm going to stay right here, but I want to be very clear. I do not consent to a search of my vehicle. If you proceed, I will be filing a formal complaint." "File whatever you want," Donovan replied, pulling open her car door. "This won't be the first complaint that goes nowhere." As Donovan began rifling through her glove compartment and center console, Dr. Wilson stood in the rain watching silently. Her phone continued recording from the dashboard. In her pocket, she felt her hospital pager vibrate. Probably the resident following up about those scans she needed to review. Donovan pulled out her medical bag from the back seat, unzipping it and pawing through the contents. "What are these?" he asked, holding up a package of sterile syringes still in their hospital packaging. "Those are standard medical supplies," Dr. Wilson explained patiently. "I'm a pediatric surgeon. Sometimes I'm called back to the hospital on short notice, so I keep basic supplies with me. Nothing there is controlled or illegal." Donovan seemed disappointed not to find anything incriminating. He continued his search, tossing her belongings carelessly onto the wet pavement. When he found nothing, his frustration was palpable. "Are we done here, officer?" Dr. Wilson asked quietly. "May I collect my things and go home to my family now?" Donovan slammed her car door shut and turned to face her. "You think you're pretty smart, don't you? Recording me, talking about rights and complaints." He pulled out his ticket book. "Well, let's see how smart you feel after I write you up for every violation I can think of." Dr. Wilson stood silently as Donovan aggressively scribbled out not one, but 3 citations, for the alleged rolling stop, for a broken taillight that wasn't actually broken, and for interfering with an officer's duties. "Sign here," he said, thrusting the papers toward her. "I'll sign to acknowledge receipt," Dr. Wilson said carefully. "But I want the record to show that I disagree with these citations and the way this stop was conducted." "Save it for the judge," Donovan said with a smirk. "Though between us, they usually take an officer's word over civilians, especially when it's just your word against mine." Dr. Wilson allowed herself a small smile. "It won't be just my word, Officer Donovan. As I mentioned, this entire interaction has been recorded." Donovan's face fell slightly, his eyes darting to the phone still visible on her dashboard. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his features. "Have a good evening, officer," Dr. Wilson said, gathering her scattered belongings from the wet pavement and returning them to her car. Her voice was steady, but inside she was shaking. With cold, with adrenaline, with righteous anger. As Donovan walked back to his patrol car, Dr. Wilson slid back into her driver's seat and took a deep breath. She stopped the recording and immediately sent a backup copy to her email and to her husband. Then she called him. "Hey, I'm going to be a bit later than I thought," she said when he answered. "Something happened on the way home that I need to take care of first." Instead of heading home, Dr. Wilson drove straight to the Westlake Police Department headquarters. By morning, her complaint would be filed. The video would be safely stored with her attorney, and Officer Ray Donovan's days of unchecked authority would be numbered. What he didn't know yet was that Dr. Wilson's brother-in-law sat on the city council. Her best friend from college was a civil rights attorney, and the judge who would eventually hear this case had very little patience for officers who abused their power. Donovan had picked the wrong person, on the wrong day, to cross the line. The morning after her encounter with Officer Donovan, Dr. Wilson arrived at the Westlake Police Department before her hospital shift. Despite getting only 4 hours of sleep, she felt alert, driven by a sense of purpose that overrode her exhaustion. The station was busier than she expected, with uniformed officers moving about and civilians waiting in plastic chairs. She approached the front desk, where a middle-aged officer was typing on a computer. "Good morning," she said. "I'd like to file a formal complaint against one of your officers." The desk sergeant looked up, his expression neutral but his eyes showing a flicker of something. Wariness, perhaps. That would be handled by Internal Affairs. Do you have the officer's name and badge number? Officer Ray Donovan, badge number 4873, Dr. Wilson replied, having memorized the information from his nameplate. I have video documentation of the incident as well. The sergeant's fingers paused over his keyboard. I see. You'll need to fill out these forms. He slid a clipboard across the counter. Someone from IA will contact you within 5 business days. 5 days? Dr. Wilson raised an eyebrow. Is there any way to expedite this? The officer conducted an illegal search of my vehicle last night, and I'm concerned he's doing this to others as well. That's the standard procedure, ma'am, the sergeant replied, his tone cooling slightly. We take all complaints seriously, but there's a process. Dr. Wilson took the clipboard and found a seat. As she filled out the forms in her precise handwriting, she noticed a young man watching her from across the waiting area. When their eyes met, he gave her a small nod, then looked away. After submitting the paperwork, Dr. Wilson made copies of her video and the citations at a nearby print shop. She then called her brother-in-law, Michael. Michael, I need your advice, she said when he answered. And possibly your help. Michael Chen was not only a city council member, but had previously worked as a public defender. He listened carefully as she described the encounter. This isn't an isolated incident, Elaine, he said after she finished. I've heard similar stories from constituents, especially in that part of town. The department keeps promising better training and accountability, but nothing changes. So what can I do? She asked. I've filed a complaint, but the sergeant made it clear that nothing's likely to come of it. That's usually true, Michael admitted. But most people don't have video evidence, and most people aren't you. I have a friend you should talk to. Her name is Priya Patel, and she's the best civil rights attorney in the state. Dr. Wilson made the call from her car before heading to the hospital. To her surprise, Priya agreed to see her during her lunch break that very day. At noon, Dr. Wilson found herself in a modest office downtown. Priya Patel was younger than she expected, perhaps in her mid-30s, with an intense focus that reminded Dr. Wilson of her fellow surgeons. I've worked with Michael on several police misconduct cases, Priya explained after they'd exchanged greetings. The department's internal investigation will almost certainly clear Donovan. They might give him a verbal warning at most, but that video gives us options. Dr. Wilson watched as Priya reviewed the footage on her laptop, occasionally pausing to take notes. When it finished, the attorney leaned back in her chair. He lied about probable cause, conducted an illegal search, and essentially threatened you, Priya said. This is textbook misconduct. The question is, what do you want out of this? Dr. Wilson considered the question. I want him to face consequences, real ones. And I want to make sure he can't do this to anyone else. Most people don't have the resources or connections that I do. Priya nodded. Then we don't just file a complaint. We file a civil rights lawsuit and push for a judicial review of Donovan's conduct. It won't be easy. The police union will fight back hard. The department will close ranks. Are you prepared for that? I am, Dr. Wilson said firmly. I've got enough on my plate with my patients and family, but I can't just let this go. Then, let's get started. Over the next 3 weeks, Dr. Wilson's life became a balancing act. By day, she performed delicate surgeries on children, her hands steady and her mind focused. By night, she worked with Priya, reviewing documents, preparing statements, and gathering additional information about Officer Donovan. What they discovered was troubling. Donovan had 6 previous complaints filed against him in his 8 years on the force. All had been dismissed for insufficient evidence. Most had been filed by people of color or younger drivers. None of them had video evidence. Meanwhile, the department's internal investigation was moving at a glacial pace. When Dr. Wilson called for updates, she was told the matter was under review, or that the investigating officer was out of the office. Then, exactly 4 weeks after the traffic stop, Dr. Wilson received a letter from the Westlake Police Department. The Internal Affairs Division had completed its investigation and found that Officer Donovan had acted within departmental guidelines. They expressed regret for any misunderstanding, but stood by their officer's actions. Dr. Wilson wasn't surprised, but she was disappointed. She called Priya immediately. "This is actually good news," the attorney said after hearing about the letter. "Now we can demonstrate that the department had an opportunity to address the misconduct and chose not to. Our lawsuit just got stronger." Priya had already filed their case with the district court, requesting a judicial review of both the traffic stop and the department's handling of the complaint. The hearing was scheduled for the following month. 2 days later, Dr. Wilson was paged while in the middle of surgery. She finished closing her patient, a 6-year-old boy with appendicitis, before checking the message. It was from Priya. "Call me when you can." Donovan's attorney reached out. "They want to talk." When Dr. Wilson finally called back, Priya explained that the police union's lawyers had suggested a settlement. They were offering to drop all the citations against Dr. Wilson and place a letter of reprimand in Donovan's file. "That's insulting," Dr. Wilson said. "A letter that no one will ever see?" "Exactly," Priya agreed. "They're hoping you'll go away quietly. Most people do, especially when they're up against the union's resources." "Well, I'm not most people," Dr. Wilson replied, "and I'm fortunate enough to have resources of my own." The next day, local news outlets picked up the story. Dr. Wilson hadn't sought media attention, but Michael had connections at the city newspaper, and Priya had worked with a reporter in the past who covered police accountability issues. The mere headline was straightforward: "Respected surgeon sues police department over officer misconduct." The article included still images from the video, with Dr. Wilson standing in the rain while Officer Donovan searched her car. The reporter had also uncovered 2 additional complaints against Donovan that hadn't been in the official records they'd received. The police department issued a terse statement defending their officer and their investigation, but the damage was done. The comment section of the online article filled with stories from other residents who claimed to have had similar experiences with Westlake Police. Dr. Wilson received calls from hospital administration, concerned about the publicity but ultimately supportive of her stand. Her colleagues stopped her in hallways to offer encouragement. Even some of her patients' parents mentioned seeing her in the news. Not all the attention was positive. An anonymous caller left a threatening message on her home phone. Someone wrote "snitch" on her car while it was parked at the hospital. The police union issued a statement suggesting that anti-police sentiment was endangering officers' ability to do their jobs. Through it all, Dr. Wilson continued her work, both in the operating room and with Priya. They prepared for the upcoming hearing, gathering evidence and refining their arguments. The day before they were due in court, Priya received another call from the union's attorney. This time they were offering a real settlement. Donovan would be suspended for 2 weeks without pay, and the department would commit to reviewing their search policies. Dr. Wilson didn't hesitate. "No, we see this through." "Are you sure?" Priya asked. "A judge might not give us more than that." "I'm sure," Dr. Wilson said. "This was never about getting an apology or seeing him miss a paycheck. This is about accountability, real accountability." As she hung up the phone, Dr. Wilson looked at the calendar on her kitchen wall. Tomorrow they would appear before Judge Gloria Hernandez, known for her no-nonsense approach and fierce independence. If anyone would see through the department's excuses, it would be her. Dr. Wilson slept surprisingly well that night, more confident than ever that she was doing the right thing. Tomorrow, Officer Ray Donovan would finally have to answer for crossing the line. The Westlake County Courthouse stood tall against the morning sky, its weathered stone steps already busy with people coming and going. Dr. Wilson arrived early, dressed in a simple navy suit rather than her usual scrubs. Priya met her at the entrance carrying a sleek leather briefcase and looking completely at ease. "Ready?" Priya asked, giving Dr. Wilson's arm a reassuring squeeze. "As I'll ever be," Dr. Wilson replied. She had performed countless surgeries, some lasting over 12 hours, but somehow this felt more nerve-wracking. In the operating room, she was in control. Here, she was stepping into unknown territory. They passed through security and made their way to courtroom 4. The room was smaller than Dr. Wilson had imagined, with worn wooden benches and faded green carpeting. A handful of people were already seated, A few reporters she recognized from local news outlets, some curious law students, and in the back row, to her surprise, her husband David. He hadn't mentioned coming. He caught her eye and gave her a small thumbs up. On the other side of the room sat Officer Donovan, almost unrecognizable in a dark suit instead of his uniform. Next to him was a sharp-looking man in an expensive suit. Thomas Reed, the police union's top attorney. Donovan didn't look at Dr. Wilson when she entered, keeping his eyes fixed straight ahead. Also present was Captain Howard, the head of internal affairs, and the department's public relations officer. They whispered to each other as Dr. Wilson and Priya took their seats. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the bailiff called for everyone to rise as Judge Gloria Hernandez entered the courtroom. The judge was a small woman, with steel gray hair cut in a practical bob and reading glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. Despite her size, she commanded immediate respect as she took her seat at the bench. "Good morning," Judge Hernandez said, her voice clear and firm. "We're here for case number 2025 CV 4873, Wilson versus Westlake Police Department. This is a petition for judicial review of police conduct during a traffic stop on May 12th, as well as the subsequent internal investigation. Ms. Patel, you may present your case." Priya rose, thanking the judge before launching into a concise summary of the events. She laid out the facts methodically: the questionable traffic stop, the false claim of suspicious smells, the illegal search, and the retaliatory citations. "Your Honor, at the heart of this case is a clear violation of Dr. Wilson's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure," Priya said. "Officer Donovan conducted a search without consent, without a warrant, and without genuine probable cause. When Dr. Wilson attempted to assert her rights, she was punished with multiple citations, including one for a broken taillight that was demonstrably functional." Priya then played the video recording. The courtroom fell silent as they watched the interaction unfold. Dr. Wilson standing in the rain while Officer Donovan rifled through her car, tossing her medical supplies onto the wet pavement. The audio captured his dismissive tone and thinly veiled threats clearly. When the video ended, Priya continued, "The department's internal investigation cleared Officer Donovan of any wrongdoing. Despite this clear evidence, we believe this demonstrates a pattern of protecting officers at the expense of citizens' rights." Judge Hernandez listened without expression, occasionally making notes. When Priya finished, she turned to Thomas Reed. "Mr. Reed, your response?" Reed stood smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket. "Thank you, Your Honor. While the video may appear concerning to laypeople, it fails to capture the full context of the situation. Officer Donovan is a decorated officer with 8 years of exemplary service. He has developed instincts that civilians and, with all due respect, even judges cannot fully appreciate." At this, Judge Hernandez raised an eyebrow slightly, but Reed continued, "Police officers must make split-second decisions based on subtle cues that may not be apparent on video. Officer Donovan genuinely believed he detected signs of possible criminal activity. The Fourth Amendment allows for reasonable searches based on an officer's training and experience. This search falls well within those boundaries." Reed went on to argue that the internal investigation had been thorough and fair, conducted by seasoned investigators who understood the complexities of police work. He dismissed Dr. Wilson's complaint as stemming from a misunderstanding of police procedure and possibly from resentment over receiving multiple citations. "Your Honor, if citizens were allowed to second-guess officers' judgment at every turn, effective policing would become impossible. We ask that you defer to the expertise of the department in this matter." Judge Hernandez removed her glasses and studied Reed for a moment. "I understand your position, Mr. Reed. Now I'd like to hear directly from Officer Donovan about the events of that evening." Donovan took the stand and was sworn in. Up close, Dr. Wilson could see dark circles under his eyes and a slight nervous twitch in his left hand. Still, when Reed began questioning him, his voice was steady. "Officer Donovan, could you explain why you initiated the traffic stop that evening?" "Yes, sir. I observed Dr. Wilson's vehicle roll through a stop sign at the intersection of Maple and 5th. It was a clear violation of traffic laws." "And why did you decide to search the vehicle?" Donovan straightened slightly. Based on my training and experience, I detected signs that suggested possible criminal activity. The driver seemed nervous and evasive. I also detected what I believed could be the odor of controlled substances. Dr. Wilson felt her jaw tighten at the blatant lie. Priya placed a calming hand on her arm. Did you at any point feel that Dr. Wilson was being uncooperative or difficult? Reed asked. Yes, sir. She immediately questioned my authority and began making demands. She refused to comply with my instructions and seemed unnecessarily confrontational. Reed nodded sympathetically. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge. Hernandez turned to Priya. Your witness, Ms. Patel. Priya approached the stand with an iPad in hand. Officer Donovan, you testified that Dr. Wilson rolled through a stop sign. Yet in your own dashcam footage, which we've obtained through discovery, her brake lights are clearly visible for 3 seconds at the stop sign. Would you like to revise your statement? Donovan shifted uncomfortably. The camera angle might not show the full picture. From my perspective, the vehicle didn't come to a complete stop. I see, Priya said. And you claimed you detected the odor of controlled substances, yet no substances were found in the search, correct? That's correct, but... And Dr. Wilson was coming directly from the hospital where she works as a surgeon, still wearing scrubs with her hospital ID clearly visible, correct? Yes, but many criminals use disguises or cover stories. Priya cut him off. Officer Donovan, in the video we just watched, you told Dr. Wilson, and I quote, "This won't be the first complaint that goes nowhere." What did you mean by that? Donovan glanced at Reed, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. I meant that frivolous complaints are common in police work. The department investigates them all thoroughly. Yet you said this before any complaint was filed, Priya noted. It sounds more like you were confident that even legitimate complaints would be dismissed. Were you referring to the 6 previous complaints against you that were all dismissed by internal affairs? Objection. Reed stood quickly. Previous complaints are not relevant to this case. They are relevant if they establish a pattern of misconduct and departmental negligence, Priya countered. Judge Hernandez considered for a moment. I'll allow it. The witness will answer. Donovan's face had reddened slightly. Those complaints were investigated and found to be without merit. Just like Dr. Wilson's complaint, Priya said. One last question, Officer Donovan. Do you believe the rules of constitutional law apply to you while you're in uniform? Of course they do, Donovan replied, his tone defensive. Then why did you tell Dr. Wilson, and again I quote from your own recorded words, "Out here I decide what happens"? Were you suggesting your authority supersedes her constitutional rights? The courtroom had gone completely still. Even Reed seemed momentarily at a loss for how to object. Donovan's jaw tightened. You're taking that out of context. I was simply explaining the reality of police work. Sometimes we have to make judgment calls in the field that civilians don't. Understand? Priya raised an eyebrow. Including ignoring the Fourth Amendment when it's inconvenient? Objection, Reed found his voice. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Hernandez said. Ms. Patel, please confine yourself to questions rather than commentary. My apologies, Your Honor, Priya said, though she didn't look particularly sorry. No further questions. As Donovan returned to his seat, Judge Hernandez called Captain Howard to the stand to explain the internal affairs investigation. The captain described a by-the-book process, emphasizing the department's commitment to transparency and accountability. He admitted they had reviewed the video, but maintained that Officer Donovan's actions, while perhaps not ideally executed, fell within departmental guidelines. And those guidelines, Judge Hernandez asked, do they conform to constitutional requirements? Of course, Your Honor, Captain Howard replied smoothly. All our policies are reviewed by the city attorney's office. The testimony continued through the morning, with Reed doing his best to portray Officer Donovan as a dedicated public servant, caught in a misunderstanding, while Priya methodically exposed contradictions between the video evidence and the department's account. By the time closing arguments began, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Dr. Wilson sat straight-backed, watching Judge Hernandez for any hint of which way she was leaning. The judge's expression remained impassive, her eyes sharp as she listened to both attorneys make their final points. Your Honor, Reed concluded, we ask that you respect the department's expertise in this matter and dismiss this petition. The safety of our community depends on officers being able to do their jobs without fear of Monday morning quarterbacking by those who have never walked in their shoes. Priya rose for her closing statement. Your Honor, this case is not about undermining police authority. It's about ensuring that authority is exercised within the boundaries of the law. When officers like Ray Donovan believe they are above those boundaries, when they can search without cause, intimidate without consequence, and lie without fear, we all become less safe, not more. We ask that you uphold the constitutional principles that protect all citizens, even when those principles are inconvenient for those in power. Judge Hernandez nodded. Thank you both. I'll take this matter under advisement and issue my ruling tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Court is adjourned. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Dr. Wilson caught Officer Donovan looking at her for the first time that day. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes suggested he was no longer so confident that his badge would shield him from consequences. For the first time since this ordeal began, Dr. Wilson felt a glimmer of hope that justice might actually be served. Dr. Wilson barely slept that night. She tossed and turned, replaying the day's events in her mind. Next to her, David slept soundly, his presence a comfort even in her restlessness. At 5 a.m. she gave up on sleep and slipped out of bed. In the quiet of their kitchen, she made coffee and watched the sunrise through the window. Whatever happened today, she had done what she could. She had stood up not just for herself but for everyone who had ever been wronged by someone abusing their authority. You're up early, David said, padding into the kitchen in his slippers. He poured himself coffee and sat beside her. Nervous about today? Yes, she admitted. And no. Part of me just wants it to be over, whatever the outcome. David took her hand. I'm proud of you, you know. Most people would have paid the tickets and tried to forget about it. She squeezed his hand. I couldn't live with myself if I did that. They arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early, but Priya was already waiting on the steps, looking fresh despite the early hour. Good morning, she greeted them. Ready for the big moment? Dr. Wilson nodded. As ready as I'll ever be. They weren't, the only ones eager for the ruling. The small courtroom was packed this morning. News of the case had spread, drawing more reporters, local activists, and curious citizens. Dr. Wilson even spotted a few of her colleagues from the hospital. Officer Donovan arrived with his attorney and several other officers in uniform, a show of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes suggesting he might have had a restless night as well. At precisely 9 a.m., Judge Hernandez entered the courtroom. The room fell silent as she took her seat and arranged her papers. Before I deliver my ruling, she began, I want to thank both parties for their presentations yesterday. I reviewed the evidence thoroughly last night, including watching the video multiple times and reading all relevant case law. She looked up, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom. This case presents important questions about the balance between effective law enforcement and constitutional rights. Both are essential to a functioning society, and neither should be sacrificed in service of the other. Judge Hernandez picked up a document from her desk. Officer Donovan testified that he stopped Dr. Wilson because she rolled through a stop sign. However, the dashcam footage clearly shows her vehicle coming to a complete stop for 3 seconds. This discrepancy is troubling. Reed shifted in his seat but remained silent. He further testified that he detected signs of potential criminal activity, including what he described as the odor of controlled substances. Yet no such substances were found, and Dr. Wilson was clearly returning from her shift at the hospital, still wearing scrubs. Judge Hernandez put down the paper and removed her glasses. What concerns me most is not just these individual misrepresentations, but what they suggest about Officer Donovan's understanding of his role. During the recorded interaction, he stated, and I quote, "Out here, I decide what happens. This reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of police authority in our constitutional system." The judge leaned forward slightly. "Officer Donovan, please," Stand. Donovan rose slowly, his face pale. I want to speak directly to you before delivering my formal ruling, Judge Hernandez said, her voice firm but not unkind. You chose a profession dedicated to public service and the protection of our community. It's a noble calling, and one that comes with significant power. But that power is granted by the people through their laws and constitution, and it must be exercised within those boundaries. Donovan stood rigidly, his gaze fixed somewhere above the judge's head. The uniform you wear grants you the community's trust, not immunity from accountability, Judge Hernandez continued. When you told Dr. Wilson that complaints against you go nowhere, you revealed a troubling belief that the systems designed to ensure accountability don't apply to you. This attitude undermines the very foundation of trust that allows police to function effectively in a democratic society. The courtroom was utterly silent. Even the reporters had stopped typing, captivated by the judge's words. Now to my formal ruling, Judge Hernandez said, putting her glasses back on. Based on the evidence presented, I find that Officer Ray Donovan violated Dr. Wilson's Fourth Amendment rights by conducting a search without probable cause or consent. I am ordering all citations issued to Dr. Wilson during this incident be dismissed with prejudice. Dr. Wilson felt Priya's hand on her arm, a silent congratulation, but the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, I find the internal affairs investigation into this incident was inadequate and appears designed to protect Officer Donovan rather than to discover the truth. Captain Howard testified that departmental guidelines conform to constitutional requirements. Yet those same guidelines somehow found Officer Donovan's clearly unconstitutional search to be acceptable. This suggests either the guidelines themselves are flawed, or they are being applied in a manner that renders them meaningless. Captain Howard, seated behind Reed, stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. Therefore, I am ordering a comprehensive review of the Westlake Police Department's search and seizure policies to be conducted by an independent third party approved by this court. I am also ordering a review of all complaints filed against Officer Donovan in the past 5 years to be conducted by the District Attorney's Office rather than Internal Affairs. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. This was going further than anyone had expected. Additionally, Judge Hernandez continued, raising her voice slightly to quiet the room, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for consideration of criminal charges for civil rights violations. I am also recommending that Officer Donovan be suspended pending the outcome of these investigations. Donovan swayed slightly where he stood. Reed placed a hand on his arm to steady him. Finally, the judge said, I want to address a broader issue that this case has brought to light. The blue wall of silence that protects officers who abuse their authority doesn't just harm individual citizens like Dr. Wilson. It poisons the relationship between police and the communities they serve. It makes good officers complicit in the misconduct of their colleagues. And ultimately, it makes everyone less safe. Judge Hernandez looked directly at the uniformed officers sitting behind Donovan. You all took an oath to uphold the Constitution, not to protect one another from the consequences of violating it. I urge you to remember that oath as this case proceeds. She turned back to Donovan, who still stood frozen before her. Officer Donovan, you may be seated. This ruling is effective. Immediately. Court is adjourned. The bang of the gavel seemed to break a spell. The courtroom erupted in noise. Reporters rushing for the door. Spectators talking excitedly. Attorneys gathering their papers. Dr. Wilson sat still for a moment, processing what had just happened. She had hoped for justice but hadn't expected such a comprehensive and powerful response from the judge. Congratulations, Priya said, beaming. This is everything we hoped for and more. What happens now? Dr. Wilson asked, watching as Donovan huddled with Reed and the other officers, their expressions grim. Now the real work begins, Priya replied. The DA will investigate, the department will be forced to reform its policies, and hopefully, other officers will think twice before abusing their power. As they gathered their belongings, a young reporter approached Dr. Wilson. Dr. Wilson, how do you feel about the judge's ruling? Dr. Wilson considered the question carefully. I feel relieved, not just for myself but for everyone in our community. This case was never about punishing one officer. It was about ensuring that the power we give to police comes with appropriate checks and balances. The reporter nodded. Would you do it all again, knowing how difficult this process would be? Without hesitation, Dr. Wilson replied. Some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. As they left the courthouse, Dr. Wilson noticed a small group of people waiting on the steps. To her surprise, they began to applaud as she emerged. Among them was a young man she recognized from the police station waiting room, the day she'd filed her complaint. He stepped forward. Thank you, he said simply. I filed a complaint against Donovan last year. Nothing came of it. I didn't have video like you did. Others shared similar stories, of traffic stops that went too far, of searches without cause, of complaints dismissed without investigation. Dr. Wilson listened to each one, struck by how many people had experienced what she had but without her resources or connections. This is why we fought, Priya whispered to her. For them. Dr. Wilson nodded, a new resolve forming within her. This victory wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The judge's ruling had opened a door, but walking through it would require more work, more courage, and more voices speaking up. As the crowd dispersed, Dr. Wilson noticed Officer Donovan leaving the courthouse with his attorney. Their eyes met briefly across the plaza. There was no anger in his gaze now, only a dawning realization that the shield he had hidden behind for so long had finally been pierced. Dr. Wilson turned away first. She had a surgery scheduled that afternoon, a child waiting for her healing hands. She would continue saving lives, one patient at a time. But now, she would also be helping to save something else. The principle that no one, regardless of their uniform or badge, was above the law. 6 months had passed since Judge Hernandez's ruling, and the ripple effects continued to spread throughout Westlake and beyond. Dr. Wilson sat in her office at the hospital, reviewing patient charts during a rare quiet moment in her day. A knock at the door pulled her attention away from her computer screen. Come in, she called. Priya entered, looking as put together as always in a tailored pantsuit, though her smile seemed particularly bright today. I hope I'm not interrupting. Anything important? Priya said, taking a seat across from Dr. Wilson. Just routine paperwork. What brings you here? Good news, I hope. Priya nodded, placing a folder on the desk between them. The best kind. The district attorney's office just announced formal charges against Donovan. Civil rights violations, filing false reports, and abuse of authority. Dr. Wilson took a deep breath. Part of her had wondered if this day would ever come. The system had protected Donovan for so long that seeing it finally hold him accountable felt almost surreal. Will it go to trial? She asked. Probably not, Priya replied. His attorney has already reached out about a plea deal. They know the video makes their case nearly impossible to win. He'll likely lose his badge and might serve some probation time. Dr. Wilson nodded slowly, processing this information. How are things at the department? That's the other reason I'm here, Priya said, opening the folder. The independent review of their policies is complete. The findings are, well, about what we expected. Systematic problems in how complaints were handled, inconsistent application of search protocols, and a troubling pattern of dismissing complaints against certain officers. She slid a document across the desk. The mayor's office is announcing a complete overhaul of the police oversight system. They're creating a civilian review board with actual teeth, subpoena power, independent investigators, the works. Dr. Wilson scanned the document, noting the extensive changes being implemented. And the other complaints against Donovan? The DA's office found that 5 of the 6 previous complaints had merit, Priya said. They're reaching out to those individuals now. Some may have civil cases if they want to pursue them. Dr. Wilson leaned back in her chair, feeling a complex mix of emotions, satisfaction that justice was finally being served, but also a certain heaviness knowing how many people had been hurt before anything was done. There's something else, Priya added, pulling out her phone. Have you seen this? She pulled up a video that had gone viral in the past week. It showed a traffic stop in a neighboring county. A young driver was calmly explaining to an officer that she did not consent to a search of her vehicle. "I understand you're doing your job," the woman in the video said, "but I know my rights. Unless you have a warrant or probable cause, I do not consent to a search." The officer, instead of escalating the situation, simply nodded. "That's your right, ma'am, I respect that. I'll just issue the warning for the broken taillight and you can be on your way." "People are calling it the Wilson effect," Priya explained. "Your case has become a sort of benchmark. It's changed how some officers approach these situations, and it's definitely changed how people respond to them. More citizens are calmly asserting their rights, and more officers are respecting those boundaries." Dr. Wilson smiled slightly. "I never expected any of this when I filed that complaint. I just wanted Donovan to face some consequences for how he treated me." "That's usually how change happens," Priya said. "One person stands up, then another and another. Before you know it, you've started a movement." After Priya left, Dr. Wilson found herself reflecting on everything that had happened since that rainy night 6 months ago. The changes hadn't all been easy or straightforward. The police union had fought back hard, running ads suggesting that civilian oversight would make the community less safe. Some officers had even staged a slowdown, taking their time responding to non-emergency calls in protest of the new policies. Dr. Wilson herself had received hate mail and even a few threats from people who saw her as anti-police. Some called her an opportunist or accused her of wanting to defund the police entirely. She'd had to explain countless times that holding bad officers accountable actually supported good policing by building community trust. But there had been positive changes too, beyond just the formal policy reforms. 2 weeks after the ruling, Dr. Wilson had received a call from Tom Parker, a lieutenant in the Westlake Police Department. He'd asked to meet with her, and though initially wary, she had agreed. Over coffee, Parker had thanked her. "What you did took courage," he'd told her. "And I want you to know that not everyone on the force stood with Donovan. Some of us have been trying to change things from the inside for years. Your case gave us leverage we never had before." Parker had gone on to explain that a group of officers within the department had formed a reform committee, working with the new civilian oversight board to rebuild trust with the community. They were revamping training protocols, emphasizing de-escalation techniques, and creating real consequences for officers who violated rights or abused their power. Then there was the foundation, using the settlement money from her civil suit against the department filed after the judge's ruling. Dr. Wilson had established the Justice Access Foundation. The organization provided legal assistance to people who believed their rights had been violated by law enforcement, but couldn't afford an attorney. Priya had helped set it up and now served on its board, along with Michael and several community activists. In just a few months, they'd taken on dozens of cases, winning many and forcing accountability in situations that would have previously been ignored. The foundation also conducted Know Your Rights workshops in communities that historically had difficult relationships with police. Dr. Wilson occasionally spoke at these events, sharing her story and emphasizing that standing up for your rights wasn't anti-police, it was pro-justice. Today, 6 months after the ruling, Dr. Wilson had one more appointment before heading home. She gathered her things and drove to the community center where the foundation was hosting a special event. The room was already full when she arrived. Community members, local officials, and even a few police officers in plain clothes had gathered to witness something remarkable: the graduation of the first class of the Citizen Police Academy. The program, a collaboration between the foundation and reformers within the police department, had brought together citizens and officers for 10 weeks of dialogue, education, and relationship building. They'd learned from each other, challenged assumptions, and created the beginnings of a new approach to community safety. As Dr. Wilson took her seat, she spotted a familiar face in the audience: Captain Howard, the internal affairs officer, who had defended Donovan at the hearing. He looked uncomfortable but determined to be there. Their eyes met briefly and he gave her a small, acknowledging nod. The ceremony was simple but powerful. Graduates shared what they'd learned, both citizens and officers speaking honestly about changed perspectives and new understandings. 1. Officer admitted that he'd never really considered how intimidating a traffic stop could feel from the other side. A community activist acknowledged gaining a new appreciation for the difficult decisions officers faced daily. When it was Dr. Wilson's turn to speak, she kept her remarks brief. 6 months ago, I stood in a courtroom not knowing if one voice could really make a difference against a system that seemed designed to protect itself, she said. What I've learned since then is that change doesn't come from one person speaking. It comes from what happens when that one voice gives others the courage to add their own. She gestured to the graduates. What you've done here is the real work of change. You've chosen dialogue over division, understanding over assumption, and collaboration over conflict. This is how we build the community we all deserve. 1. Where power comes with accountability, where rights are respected, and where justice truly is for all. As the ceremony ended and people mingled over refreshments, Dr. Wilson found herself in conversation with one of the police officers who had graduated from the program. I've been on the force for 12 years, the officer told her, and I've seen plenty of guys like Donovan. Used to be, we'd just look the other way. But your case would change something. Made us realize that protecting bad cops doesn't protect the badge. It tarnishes it. Dr. Wilson nodded. That's exactly what Judge Hernandez was trying to say in her ruling. Her words are required viewing at the academy now, did you know that? The officer said. Every new recruit watches the video of her speech. The uniform you wear grants you the community's trust, not immunity from accountability. That line hits hard. As Dr. Wilson drove home that evening, she reflected on how a single moment, one officer crossing the line, one citizen refusing to back down, one judge willing to speak truth to power, had sparked a transformation that was still unfolding. The work wasn't finished. Real change never happened overnight. But in Westlake, at least, the balance was shifting.